Hello, everyone. So sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I'm still happy I can contribute to the conversation. Really quickly, my name is Pyar Seth, and I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate at Johns Hopkins University. I'm in the Grass Humanities Institute, pursuing a joint degree in political science and anthropology. I'm also a visiting research scholar at King's College London. And so I actually wanted to start by giving a shout out to some of the work of a young scholar of color, Amit Singh. He's a professor at University College London, who wrote a text that just came out, Fighting Identity. And I'd encourage all of you to check it out. But it's an ethnography of kickboxing in East London. And I saw Amit actually give a talk on the book not too long ago. And in the text, he talks about a particular exchange he has with one of the coaches at the kickboxing gym, where he conducted his ethnographic fieldwork. And at a research site that was predominantly dominated by Black and Polish fighters, he recounts a moment where one of the coaches generally says, it doesn't matter what you look like, how you identify. When you come to that gym, you're a fighter, right? And Amit says she doesn't elaborate much on, that phrase, right? But she just says, when you come to that gym, you're a fighter. And so as I see it, there are a couple of different things kind of going on there, right? The first is, there's a way that kind of discursive utterance can easily be absorbed into a resistance frame, right? That is, right, there's a way that some might quickly read the combat sports gym as a site that resists, contests, and works against the logics of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, and the like, right? By no means am I saying that we should do away with notions of resistance or that it isn't a very legitimate way of rendering particular spaces as sites of resistance, right? But I do think that a certain level of complexity is kind of lost, especially when we think about what I think kind of Amit is trying to urge us to think about, right? And so there's another read where, some might actually read this discursive utterance as something that's actually rather naive, right? That is, do we actually believe in racial utopias, genderless spaces, colorblind narratives, right? This idea of, I don't see difference, right? When you come to that gym, all I see is a fighter, right? Some might say that this is just a kind of, cute one-liner that belongs in a nice commercial or an advertisement, right? But I think what Amit actually does a really good job of doing is that he's really trying to get us to think about how certain spaces serve as sites of possibility, right? What he calls complex solidarities and constrained sameness, right? That is to beg the question, right? Perhaps we are not destined to become what we always already are, right? And for some of us who are familiar with the work of Sylvia Wynter, this immediately kind of lends itself to the question, what does it mean to be human, right? And so I say this to say that when I think about this question of allyship, right, I think of it as a question that is surely a question of possibility, right? A question of the human, but I think more specifically, a question of, what kinds of politics are necessary for transformative justice, right? What sorts of ways of being, right, and ways of relation would we like to see in a more just social world, right? And perhaps most importantly, right, as Amit shows, that sport can be a really crucial ground to think through some of these very questions. This question of how is it that two people that have never met can share such a warm, genuine embrace after their favorite sports team scores a touchdown, dunks a basketball, or scores a winning goal, right? That, in a just social world, we'd like to see perhaps these kinds of instantaneous recognitions of one another's humanity, right? Personally, some of the fondest moments from my childhood are, me watching basketball games with my pop, right? Those TNT doubleheaders on Thursday nights. And so sport, can also serve as the site that evokes particular kind of memories, right? Memories that take us to the heights of ecstasy and the depths of despair, right? And a lot of these insights, I think, come from thinking relationally, right? What are the, kind of social and political conditions under which certain sets of relations and discursive claims are made possible, right? Bourdieu famously argues, as many of us already know, that sport was an important locus between social classes, right? It was a relational social space that doesn't fall neatly into the dogmatic dualism of individual, collective, conscious, unconscious, interested, disinterested, objective, subjective, right? And for Bourdieu, kind of thinking relationally was also a kind of methodological intervention, right? It was one that kind of helps us move beyond some of these bifurcated analytic categories. And so I think part of what I've just kind of been thinking through is thinking that for many of us interested in the history of sport, our research sites, the questions that we have can be really powerful frames for thinking through this very question of allyship, right? Especially when we think about what allyship entails, what justice entails, right? I'm thinking a lot about, the work in sports psychology and organizational behavior that talks about team dynamics and organizational context, right? Scholars wrestling with this question of, generally speaking, what works, right? What does it take for teams to be successful, to win championships? How do coaches facilitate good relationships with their players? what happens in these kinds of intense training environments, right, that still allow for athletes to forge such deep bonds with one another, right? And for me, I don't find that our research should necessarily hang on the thread of generalizability, right? I think, to use the language of Amit Singh, right, it's about thinking about possibility, right? I think, Michael Rolfe Trio has this beautiful line, right, where he says, moral optimism is not the same as political naivete, right? Optimism is only shameful when it isn't qualified by history, right? And why should we refuse to present ourselves, right, as having faith in humankind, right? As Harry Edwards also says himself, right, if there's any kind of secular religion amongst the people, right, it's probably sport. And so I hold a lot of faith in, what sport has to say about justice, right? From a structural perspective, sports studies have great insight about what it takes for a team and organization to be successful, right? So when we think about colleges and universities, when we think about our own academic departments, effectiveness is a very real thing to think about, right? Ranging from diverse course offerings to engage students to, I think at its most basic level, right, if you want to recruit students of color into your disciplines, you probably need more than one faculty member of color, right? And I think the history of sport tells us that, players want to play in environments where they feel welcome, right? Good teams are successful because they have a sense of cohesion and that people are on the same page, right? It's these kinds of insights that I think, in my humble opinion, I feel sport has truly underestimated its transformative potential. And I think we as scholars, too, have grossly underestimated and undervalued the significance of the claims that we're making. And so, to conclude, right, there's this scene in Malcolm X, right, the movie with Denzel, right, and there's a scene with this white woman, right, and she walks up to Denzel, Malcolm X, and she says, brother Malcolm, I'm a good person. I'm not like my ancestors. What can I do in the movement for racial justice? And her enthusiasm just kind of cracks me up, right? And Denzel, Malcolm X, replies, nothing. That's all he says, and then he keeps walking, right? And so I have to be honest, right? That's a scene that deeply, deeply resonates with me because I think it's absolutely correct, right? Let's not be naive into failing to understand that anti-Black violence is a central organizing feature of the world, right? And I don't make that kind of claim lightly, right? That is, right, we should probably do away with this notion that one day we're just going to fix it, right? That poof, right, all the violent isms and phobias magically disappear. And that for me is my kind of working definition of what it means to be naive, right? I'm a good person and I can fix it. Nah, chill out, right? But there's that, and then there's this question of possibility, right? A set of very, I think, kind of very real normative ethical questions, right? What needs to be the case for things to be otherwise? What can we do? What do we see out in the world that we like? What seems like, perhaps even at its most basic level, what do we think works and what doesn't, right? And I think the history of sport has been situated in these kinds of debates for quite some time, and that perhaps we can start to tune in more to what sport has to offer about these kinds of things, because I think it offers us a great deal.